Howard Schultz cried in a coffee shop over a dream everyone called impossible. Picture this: you've just discovered what you believe is the future of American coffee culture. You're so excited you can barely contain yourself. You rush back to your employers, the people who trust you, who hired you, who believe in your judgment, and they look you dead in the eye and tell you your idea is stupid. Not just wrong, stupid. This was Howard Schultz in 1983, and that rejection would either destroy him or forge the path to a $20 billion empire. But what lesson can we learn from how he handled the most devastating professional moment of his life? Let me take you back to where this all started, because Howard's story begins in a place most of us would recognize: financial struggle and broken dreams. Born in 1952 in the Canarsie section of Brooklyn, Howard grew up in housing projects where hope was a luxury his family couldn't afford. His father worked as a truck driver, a factory worker, whatever jobs he could find to keep the family afloat. But Howard wasn't just poor, he was angry. Angry at watching his father come home exhausted every night with nothing to show for it except aching bones and a smaller paycheck. He watched his dad get injured on the job and receive absolutely nothing from his employer. No insurance, no support, just a pink slip and a pile of medical bills. This fury would later fuel every decision Howard made as a business leader. But first, he had to escape Brooklyn. Sports became his ticket out. A football scholarship took him to Northern Michigan University, where he became the first person in his family to graduate college. After a brief stint selling office equipment, he landed a job at a small Seattle coffee company called Starbucks. Now here's where most people think the story gets smooth. Rising executive joins cute coffee company, everyone lives happily ever after, right? Wrong. Howard joined Starbucks in 1982 as their director of retail operations and marketing. But this wasn't the Starbucks you know today. They sold coffee beans and equipment, nothing else. No lattes, no frappuccinos, no cozy atmosphere with people typing away on laptops. Howard was good at his job, really good. Sales were growing, the founders trusted him, everything was going according to plan. Then came the trip that changed everything: his business visit to Milan, Italy. Walking through the streets of Milan, Howard discovered something that stopped him cold. Italians didn't just drink coffee, they experienced it. Espresso bars weren't just places to grab caffeine and run, they were community gathering spots where people connected, where baristas knew their customers by name, where coffee was theater and ritual and social glue all rolled into one. Howard stood in those Italian coffee bars feeling like he'd discovered fire. This wasn't just about better coffee, this was about importing an entire culture, about giving Americans something they didn't even know they were missing. He could see it all: the rich espresso, the steamed milks, the warm atmosphere, the sense of community. He rushed back to Seattle, practically vibrating with excitement. He'd found the missing piece, the thing that would transform Starbucks from a small regional coffee bean seller into something unprecedented. The founders were going to love this, except they hated it. Jerry Baldwin, Gordon Boker, and Zev Siegel looked at Howard's passionate presentation about espresso bars and Italian coffee culture like he'd suggested they start selling hamburgers. They weren't just uninterested, they were offended. Starbucks was a coffee bean company, they told him. They weren't in the restaurant business. This espresso bar concept would dilute their brand and distract from their core mission. Howard tried again. He showed them market research, explained the potential, painted vivid pictures of the revenue possibilities. Nothing worked. The founder saw Howard's vision as a fundamental betrayal of what Starbucks stood for. But Howard couldn't let it go. The Italian coffee bar experience had rewired something in his brain. He kept pushing, kept arguing, kept trying to convince them. The founders grew annoyed, then frustrated, then angry. This wasn't just about business anymore, this felt personal. Finally, after months of internal battle, the founders delivered their final answer. Not just no, but hell no. If Howard wanted to pursue this espresso bar fantasy, he'd have to do it somewhere else. So there he was, sitting in a coffee shop, tears streaming down his face. He'd found his life's purpose and been told it was worthless. He'd found what he believed was a billion-dollar opportunity and been called a fool. The people he respected most had essentially fired him for dreaming too big. This is the moment that separates real entrepreneurs from everyone else. Most people would have taken this as a sign. The market had spoken, the experts had decided, time to move on to something more realistic. Howard could have stayed at Starbucks, focused on selling coffee beans, collected his paycheck, and lived a perfectly fine life. Instead, he did something that seemed insane. He decided to prove them wrong. Howard started his own company, Il Giornale, focused entirely on the Italian espresso bar concept the Starbucks founders had rejected. He had to raise money from scratch, find locations, hire staff, convince skeptical investors that Americans would actually pay premium prices for fancy coffee drinks they'd never heard of. The early days were brutal. Most investors thought Howard was delusional. Americans drink diner coffee, they said. They don't sit around sipping espresso and discussing philosophy. This Italian coffee culture thing would never work in Seattle, let alone across the country. But Howard had seen something in Milan that went beyond coffee. He understood that he wasn't selling beverages, he was selling experience, community, a daily ritual that would make people's lives slightly better. Every rejection from investors just made him more determined to prove that Americans were ready for something more than gas station coffee. Meanwhile, the original Starbucks was struggling. The founders had lost their passion for the business and decided to sell. When Howard heard they were looking for buyers, he saw his chance for the ultimate vindication. He would buy the company that had rejected his vision and transform it using the exact concept they called impossible. Raising the money to buy Starbucks required Howard to convince investors to fund what still seemed like a crazy idea. He had to mortgage his house, cash in his life insurance, and beg everyone he knew for money. The stress was incredible, but Howard had been poor before. Financial risk didn't scare him. Dying with regrets did. In 1987, Howard successfully acquired Starbucks for $3.8 million. The company that had rejected his espresso bar concept now belonged to the man whose tears they caused. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about vision. Howard immediately began transforming Starbucks into the Italian-inspired coffee experience he dreamed of. Espresso machines replaced simple coffee bean displays, baristas learned to craft lattes and cappuccinos, stores became gathering places instead of just retail outlets. The results were immediate and dramatic. Customers didn't just buy Howard's coffee, they became obsessed with it. Lines formed around blocks. People started making Starbucks visits part of their daily routine. The premium pricing that investors were worried about became irrelevant because customers valued the experience Howard was providing. But Howard's vision went beyond just serving better coffee. He remembered his father come home broken from jobs that treated workers like disposable equipment. Every Starbucks employee, even part-time workers, received health insurance and stock options. He called them partners, not employees, because he understood that great customer experiences come from people who feel valued and invested in the company's success. This wasn't just good ethics, it was brilliant business strategy. Happy employees created better customer experiences, which drove customer loyalty, which enabled premium pricing, which funded expansion. The Italian coffee culture Howard had discovered wasn't just about the drinks, it was about treating everyone in the ecosystem with respect and care. The growth that followed was unlike anything the retail industry had ever seen. From that single Seattle location, Starbucks expanded to thousands of stores across America, then internationally. The company went public, making millionaires of employees who'd receive stock options. Howard's crazy Italian espresso bar concept had become a global phenomenon. The founders who had rejected Howard's vision watched their former employee build exactly what he promised on a scale beyond even Howard's original dreams. The tears Howard cried in that coffee shop had watered the seeds of one of the most successful retail concepts in history. Today, Starbucks operates over 30,000 locations in more than 80 countries. The Italian coffee culture that seems so foreign to American consumers has become as embedded in daily life as smartphones and social media. Howard transformed not just a company, but an entire industry, and he did it by refusing to accept other people's limitations on his vision. Here's what every aspiring entrepreneur needs to understand from Howard's story. The people who reject your biggest ideas aren't evil or stupid, they're just trapped by their current perspective. Howard's vision seemed impossible to the Starbucks founders because they couldn't imagine Americans embracing Italian coffee culture. But Howard had experienced that culture firsthand and understood its universal appeal. The tears Howard cried weren't signs of weakness. They were proof that he cared enough about his vision to fight for it even when everyone else gave up on him. That emotional investment became the fuel that powered him through years of rejection, financial stress, and the enormous challenges of building something entirely new.